Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. This is the first in a series of 6 classes on the history of science from the LaRouche standpoint. Today, we're going to be looking at Lyndon LaRouche, Plato, Socrates, and Nicolaus of Cusa. And our overall theme is going to be the process by which new ideas are made. So the reason that this class is being hosted by the LaRouche organization is that Lyndon LaRouche, who people may know, ran for president 8 times, also ran for Congress once. He created a political movement, and he created much more than that. He was insistent on the importance of classical culture. And for that reason, the Schiller Institute conferences have classical music and choruses. We've got a scientific trajectory as well. So the internal history of science, this is essential if you're going to be an economist. Why? Because the most basic factor in economic growth is scientific and technological advancement. If you don't understand how that happens, can you really understand economics? Making money on the markets, is that the same thing as making economic progress through the development of the steam engine? No. So the building of a movement capable of improving the world really depends on improving the minds of the people involved in that. And for that reason, LaRouche laid out what he called a narrow path of some of history's greatest thinkers, whose contributions to human thought and knowledge really laid the groundwork for the modern world and for the world that is to come, if we don't blow ourselves up with nuclear World War III before then. So that's the setting for this discussion today. I'm not going to say too much more by way of setup, and I think we'll let the different readings and speakers speak for themselves. The readings you hopefully have received in your email. They're on the course website, larouche.info/science. They're in the YouTube video description. So you can grab that there and you'll be ready to follow along with those of us here in the room. So I see that there are, we've got 89 people on Zoom. We're actually nearing our limit. So that's a lot of participants. That's good. We'll have to increase that for next time. So what we're going to do now is jump right in, and we're going to read an excerpt from Lyndon LaRouche from his 1998 paper on the substance of morality. And I'm just going to read this one. So please follow along. LaRouche writes in section 3, the principle of hypothesis. He says, the formalist, such as that pathetic creature, the mere logician, is a reductionist duped into believing that definitions, axioms, and postulates are given implicitly beforehand, as if a priori. On the basis of such presumptions, such as those presumed by an Aristotle or Immanuel Kant, it is decreed that all acceptable theorems are derived by deduction from those initial presuppositions. The Socratic method of Plato proceeds in the directly opposite direction. With Plato, one begins with propositions being entertained as prospective theorems, and then follows the approach taken in his dialogues as a way of searching out discoverable fallacies in those underlying presumptions, the definitions, axioms, and postulates, which are the adducible motives for those propositions which our prejudices have imposed upon us. The challenging of such prejudices provides the user of Plato's method with what appears to be, for the moment, a refined array of mutually non-contradictory definitions, axioms, and postulates. This refined array, taken as a whole, is a hypothesis. For example, what was traditionally taught to modern students as Euclidean geometry was such a hypothesis. The method of Plato starts with the recognition that all propositions, and therefore all hypotheses, including what were previously the most refined ones, must include some significant axiomatic fallacy of some kind. In the method of Plato, we show that a sufficiently rigorous such exploration of previously accepted sets of definitions, axioms, and postulates leads us to what are empirically contrary, mutually contradictory approaches, results. If that discovered contradiction is itself empirically truthful up to that point, then there must exist some previously overlooked or unknown principle, some new definition, axiom, or postulate, which, as a correction, resolves that contradiction. The result of a validated such correction represents a radically new set of definitions, axioms, and postulates. In other words, a new hypothesis. Truth, then, does not lie in any one choice of hypothesis. Such deductively consistent hypotheses are merely conditional. There is no certainty of settled truth in any method of deduction. Truth lies in the always radically revolutionary process by means of which valid new principles are generated, new principles which take into account contradictions inherent in the previously proposed hypothesis. The method by which such new principles are ordered in overcoming successively ordered contradictions thus represents a notion of higher hypothesis. The latter, a verifiable ordering principle which is demonstrated repeatedly to generate successively improved hypotheses. That notion of higher hypothesis coincides with the domain of reason, a domain above and beyond any mere logic, the domain within which truth and true knowledge lie. Riemann's 1854 habilitation dissertation supplies us the exemplary case. He ends this excerpt. So let me ask if anyone can think of an example of a hypothesis that was made to resolve a contradiction. What was something that was impossible or contradictory that a higher idea made clear? And if you're on Zoom, just with so many people, we can't have it, so you can just unmute yourself. But if you'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Can anyone?
Treaty of Westphalia.
Okay. Elliot says the Treaty of Westphalia was such an example. Why is that, Elliot?
Because you had the hypothesis of the Protestant, the hypothesis of the Catholic. They were committed to perpetual war. That was not a truthful or successful approach or hypothesis. So they had to come up with something higher to resolve the contradiction. And they generated three new principles by which to do it.
Okay. All right. Religious part conflict resolved by a higher principle. How about a scientific idea? Anyone think of how a new scientific idea resolved?
Parallel postulate, Euclidean geometry. That postulate could be lifted in the assumption that through a point off a line, there is one unique line that is parallel to the given line. That can be relaxed, taken away consistently to produce new geometries.
Right. So that's an assumption that Euclid made, that most people make in geometry, but it doesn't have to be true.
Many students, I remember when I was in high school, and Diane and I had a discussion on this. We're totally fascinated with Euclidean geometry. We thought it was the most fantastic thing. So it has as a system, it has a certain seduction. But if you're trying to get to Mars, it doesn't work. But anyway, it's not that, oh, well, Euclid, that's silly. And why would anybody believe that? It has a certain seduction.
The idea of the squaring of the circle, the point being, how can you find the actual circumference of the circle in a linear fashion so that you can express it in terms of the the diameter of the same circle. And so we had all kinds of efforts over many, many, many years to continue to make multi-sided multi-sided polygon, because the square was obviously in no way similar to a circle. And so you could carry this out ad infinitum. But it was Nicolaus of Cusa who came along and said, there's two different species involved here, and you have to go to a different level of thinking to figure out what's going on.
Those are the,
Hold on, there's an online comment. Beth, you go ahead. You can unmute now.
Hello?
Hi, go ahead, we can hear you.
Yeah, you hear me well? No, now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Me, I was thinking about the discovery of Einstein. I mean, if you think about the fact that before Einstein, most of the people in science they thought that time and space was absolute, and so it had consequences like all the theories. They were forecasting the fact that an object could be in the speed. I mean, the speed of objects were relative to the speed of the place they were moving in. I mean, well, I'm not. It's not very clear, but the problem is that all experiences was with the light. The speed of light was contradictory to all the theories before. And then Einstein had to imagine that space and time were related and not absolute. It's one of the examples when you study that, you really, you realize that you had to totally change your point of view on space and time. That's an example.
Good, I think there was one more from here, and then we'll take Stephanie, and then we'll move on. I see there's a couple other hands raised, but don't worry, you'll have plenty of time. Art, you had an example.
there was the
resolving a contradiction.
well, the vicarious hypothesis of Kepler comparing Ptolemy and Copernicus and Brahe. These were all hypotheses, and he showed that they were all equivalent, but not wrong.
And it takes us to Stephanie. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Jason, did you ask me to speak?
You raised your hand, and I'm offering you an opportunity to speak. Yes.
Yeah, I'm having problem hearing, but I'll speak anyway. Okay? Or should I wait?
Please speak. You're unmuted. Please speak. All right, we're going to move on then. So those are some examples of how a lower thought was resolved by a higher one. I think Einstein was mentioned. I'm going to say just a touch more about it. So Einstein took two of the concepts that underpin physics of his day. He took an idea of how light was electromagnetic, and he combined that with the relativity of Gottfried Leibniz or of others. The idea that principle or the laws of physics should operate the same whether you're still or if you're moving. If you're on a train moving at a constant speed, if you're on the Earth moving through the universe, you're going to discover the same physical laws. Einstein put those together. He said, great, let's send out a particle of light and let's race up and catch up to it and look at it. What you would see if you did that contradicted the electromagnetic nature of light. So Einstein said, okay, these cannot both be true. There's something wrong here. What's the difference? The difference is that reaching the speed of light, you can't do that. Light is the same speed for every observer. So a new principle that resolves a contradiction in what came before. So let's take a look at how this overall topic of the relationship between our senses and our hypotheses was approached by Socrates via the writings of Plato, and Nicolaus of Cusa, and then we'll come back at the end to where we're going to be heading next with Kepler and others. So we're going to read now from Book VI of Plato's Republic. And the way I want to do this is I'd like to ask if there's anyone online who would be willing to read the part of Glaucon. Please raise your hand if that appeals to you. If not, that's okay. We can have two people in the room. Okay, good. So let's start. We need a Socrates and a Glaucon. Any volunteers? Okay. I'm going to go with the first two, which is Jose, Socrates, Harry, Glaucon.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, and then just to be clear, if you click the link, you may have to scroll down. We're starting at 507B in whatever Plato translates. 507B. I moved it back one. Please, Socrates.
We predicate to be of many beautiful things and many good things, saying of them severally that they are, and so define them in our speech.
We do.
And again, we speak of a self beautiful and of a good that is only and merely good. And so, in the case of all the things that we then posited as many, we turn about and posit each as a single idea or aspect, assuming it to be a unity and call it that which each really is.
It is so.
And the one class of things we say can be seen but not thought, while the ideas can be thought but not seen.
By all means.
With which of the parts of ourselves, with which of our faculties, then, do we see visible things?
With sight.
And do we not hear audibles with hearing, and perceive all sensibles with the other senses?
Surely.
The microphone's pretty good.
Sorry.
Let's just, it sounds like you're yelling at Glaucon.
I just want to make sure that.
And a little bit slower.
Okay.
The microphone.
Any other notes?
Yeah, quit yelling at me, Socrates. Quit yelling.
Have you ever observed how much the greatest expenditure the creator of the senses has lavished on the faculty of seeing and being seen?
Why? No, I have not.
Well, look at it thus. Do hearing and voice stand in need of another medium so that the one may hear and the other be heard, in the absence of which third element the one will not hear and the other not be heard?
They need nothing.
Neither, I fancy, do many others, not to say that none require anything of the sort. Or do you know of any?
Not I.
But do you not observe that vision and the visible do have this further need?
How?
Though vision may be in the eyes, and its possessor may try to use it, and though color be present, yet without the presence of a third thing specifically, and naturally adapted to this purpose, you are aware that vision will see nothing, and the colors will remain invisible.
What is this thing of which you speak?
The thing that you call light.
You say truly.
The bond, then, that yokes together visibility and the faculty of sight is more precious by no slight form that which unites the other pairs, if light is not without honor.
It surely is far from being so.
Which one can you name of the divinities in heaven as the author and cause of this, whose light makes our vision see best and visible things to be seen?
Why? The one that you too and other people mean, or your question evidently refers to the sun.
Is not this, then, the relation of vision to that divinity?
What?
Neither vision itself, nor its vehicle, which we call the eye, is identical with the sun.
Why, no.
But it is, I think, the most sunlike of all the instruments of sense.
By far the most.
And does it not receive the power which it possesses as an influx, as it were, dispensed from the sun?
Certainly.
Is it not also true that the sun is not vision, yet as being the cause thereof, is beheld by vision itself?
That is so.
This, then, you must understand that I meant by the offspring of the good, which the good begot to stand in a proportion with itself. As the good is in the intelligible region to reason, and the objects of reason, so is this in the visible world to vision and the objects of vision.
How is that? Explain further.
You are aware that when the eyes are no longer turned upon objects upon whose colors the light of day falls, but that of the dim luminaries of night, their edge is blunted, and they appear almost blind, as if pure vision did not dwell in them.
Yes, indeed.
But when, I take it, they are directed upon objects illumined by the sun, they see clearly, and vision appears to reside in these same eyes.
Certainly.
Apply this comparison to the soul also in this way. When it is firmly fixed on the domain where truth and reality shine resplendent, it apprehends and knows them, and appears to possess reason. But when it inclines to that region which is mingled with darkness, the world of becoming and passing away, it opines only, and its edge is blunted, and it shifts its opinion hither and thither, and again seems as if it lacked reason.
Yes, it does.
This reality, then, that gives their truth to the objects of knowledge, and the power of knowing to the knower, you must say it is the idea of good, and you must conceive it as being the cause of knowledge, and of truth in so far as known. Yet fair as they both are, knowledge and truth, in supposing it to be something fairer still than these you will think rightly of it. But as for knowledge and truth, even as in our illustration it is right to deem light and vision sun-like, but never to think that they are the sun. So here it is right to consider these two their counterparts, as being like the good or boniform. But to think that either of them is the good is not right. Still, higher honor belongs to the possession and habit of the good.
An inconceivable beauty you speak of, if it is the source of knowledge and truth, and yet itself surpasses them in beauty, for you surely cannot mean that it is pleasure.
Hush, but examine the similitude of it still further in this way.
How?
The sun, I presume you will say, not only furnishes to visible the power of visibility, but it also provides for their generation and growth and nurture through it is not itself generation.
Of course not.
In like manner, then, you are to say that the objects of knowledge not only receive from the presence of the good their being known, but their very existence and essence is derived to them from it, though the good itself is not essence, but still transcends essence in dignity and surpassing power.
Heaven save us. Hyperbole can no further go.
The fault is yours for compelling me to utter my thoughts about it.
Then don't desist, but at least expound the similitude of the sun. If there is anything that you are omitting,
Why, certainly. I am omitting a great deal.
well, don't omit the least bit.
I fancy that I shall have to pass over much, but nevertheless, so far as it is at present practicable, I shall not willingly leave anything out.
Do not.
Conceive then, as we were saying, that there are these two entities, and that one of them is sovereign over the intelligible order and region, and the other over the world of the eyeball, not to say the sky ball, but let that pass. You surely apprehend the two types, the visible and the intelligible.
I do.
Let's take a break here. So what sense does Socrates think is the most profound? Is that true? Is sight better than taste? What makes it a better sense than taste?
Also, a comment where he says that no medium involved in voice and sound.
Yeah, that's not true. Yeah.
They didn't know about vacuum.
No. Well, look, I mean, sight is the only sense that takes us off this planet directly, doesn't it?
Mhm.
You know, we can see the stars, and galaxies. We can't hear them or.
Face them.
Also-
We can't face them.
Smell them.
Jason, also, I think when you close your eyes, you know, you might not necessarily see something, but you can visualize something in your mind quite easily.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's true. You can imagine hearing something too, can't you?
Yeah.
You picture how someone sounds. But then what is the what relationship? He drew an analogy here between the sun and vision and something else. Did anyone catch that?
Knowledge and truth,
Who produces the good,
or the good, yeah.
seemingly.
The good and the soul.
Surprise.
Yeah. So I'm not going to say any more about that. Let's leave that. Oh, I should have mentioned what this book is. So this is Socrates, who died in around 400 BCE. Who was involved in. He was a Athenian thinker, philosopher, troublemaker, big time troublemaker.
Sort of good trouble.
And he had one of his students was Plato. Socrates didn't leave us any writings, but Plato did. So what we know of Socrates is almost exclusively from Plato's records of the discussions that he was involved in. This is in the middle. It says Book VI. This is out of 10 books of the Republic, which is the discussion overall is about what is the state? What's the best? How could we best organize society? And that's the context for where we're coming into this. Okay, we're gonna have new readers for the second half. Yeah, I've got some breakpoints marked. One like to read. So please raise your hand. And it's online. Kevin Burrell. Okay. And so we'll have Kevin. That'll be Socrates, and we also need a Glaucon. Take someone in here if no one volunteers online. Margaret Sheldon is Glaucon. Great. So Kevin, you should be able to unmute now. Oh,
You need this over here?
No,
Yes. Where? From 510?
represent them then, as it were, by a line divided into two unequal sections.
Yes. Okay. Represent them then, as it were, by a line divided into two unequal sections and cut each section again in the same ratio.
Now, let me
section-
recommend somebody, as he's talking,
Do that,
yourself a
yeah.
favor. Come up with your own hypothesis of how this division works. I've got
Okay.
few pens of it.
Each section down the
All right,
same.
go ahead, Kevin.
Are we properly sectionalized?
Just go ahead, Kevin.
Okay. And cut each section again in the same ratio. The section that is of the visible and that of the intelligible order. And then, as an expression of the ratio of their comparative clearness and obscurity, you will have, as one of the sections of the visible world, images. By images, I mean, first, shadows, and then reflections in water and on surfaces of dense, smooth, and bright texture, and everything of that kind if you apprehend.
I do.
As the second section, assume that of which this is a likeness or an image, that is, the animals about us, and all plants, and the whole class of objects made by man.
I so assume it.
Would you be willing to say that the division in respect of reality and truth, or the opposite, is expressed by the proportion, as is the opinionable to the knowable, so is the likeness to that of which it is a likeness.
Yeah, I certainly would.
Consider then again the way in which we are to make the division of the intelligible section.
In what way?
By the distinction that there is one section of it which the soul is compelled to investigate by treating as images the things imitated in the former division, and by means of assumptions from which it proceeds not up to a first principle, but down to a conclusion. While there is another section in which it advances from its assumption to a beginning or principle that transcends assumption, and in which it makes no use of the images employed by the other section, relying on ideas only and progressing systematically through ideas.
I don't fully understand what you mean by this.
Well, I will try again. For you will better understand after this preamble. For I think you are aware that students of geometry and reckoning and such subjects first postulate the odd and the even and the various figures and three kinds of angles and other things akin to these in each branch of science, regard them as known, and, treating them as absolute assumptions, do not deign to render any further account of them to themselves or others, taking it for granted that they are obvious to everybody. They take their start from these, and pursuing the inquiry from this point on consistently, conclude with that for the investigation of which they set out.
Well, certainly, I know that.
And do you not also know that they further make use of the visible forms and talk about them, though they are not thinking of them, but of those things of which they are a likeness, pursuing their inquiry for the sake of the square as such, and the diagonal as such, and not for the sake of the image of it which they draw. And so in all cases, the very things which they mold and draw, which have shadows and images of themselves in water, these things they treat in turn as only images, but that what they really seek is to get sight of those realities which can be seen only by the mind.
True.
This, then, is the class that I described as intelligible. It is true, but with the reservation first that the soul is compelled to employ assumptions in the investigation of, not proceeding to a first principle because of its inability to extricate itself from and rise above its assumptions, and second, that it uses as images or likenesses the very objects that are themselves copied and adumbrated by the class below them, and that in comparison with these latter are esteemed as clear and held in honor.
I understand that you're speaking of what falls under geometry and the kindred arts.
Understand then that by the other section of the intelligible, I mean that which the reason itself lays hold of by the powers of dialectics, treating its assumptions not as absolute beginnings, but literally as hypotheses, underpinnings, footings, and springboards, so to speak, to enable it to rise to that which requires no assumption and is the starting point of all. And after attaining to that again, taking hold of the first dependencies from it, so to proceed downward to the conclusion, making no use whatever of any objective sense, but only of pure ideas moving on through ideas to ideas and ending with ideas.
I understand not fully, for it is no slight task that you appear to have in mind. But I do understand that you mean to distinguish the aspect of reality and the intelligible, which is contemplated by the power of dialectic, as something truer and more exact than the object of the so-called arts and sciences, whose assumptions are arbitrary starting points. And though it is true that those who contemplate them are compelled to use their understanding and not their senses, yet because they do not go back to the beginning in the study of them, but start from assumption, you do not think they possess true intelligence about them, although the things themselves are intelligibles when apprehended in conjunction with a first principle. And I think you call the mental habit of geometers and they're like mind or understanding and not reason, because you regard understanding as something intermediate between opinion and reason.
Your interpretation is quite sufficient. And now, answering to these four sections, assume these four affections occurring in the soul. Intellection, or reason, for the highest, understanding for the second, assign belief to the third, and to the last, picture thinking or conjecture, and arrange them in a proportion, considering that they participate in clearness and precision in the same degree as their objects partake of truth and reality.
I understand. I concur and arrange them as you bid.
Socrates has had us divide the line here into some portions, some segments. Did anybody draw that line either here or online? Would like to share their drawing? Okay. I think if we switch to the other camera and I.
Yeah.
Can you put this backward on the main table?
Your paper, please. I want online to you.
I think
Okay.
that should be.
I can sort of see this. So Perry, what do we have here?
Well, I was going through the line. It's a very rudimentary drawing, but Socrates was instructing Glaucon to make a line and divide it into sections, and then the bottom line is the four ways of the four levels of understanding that Socrates brought up, and I thought maybe that, yeah, I was kind of like visualizing something, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Visual.
Yeah.
You was trying to say that you divide the line unequally on each section.
Do you have a drawing of what you think it should look like? Another drawing. Okay, might be hard to read. It says visible here, which has a subdivision in it, and we see intelligible here with the subdivision. How does this work, Art?
Well, I divided the bigger line unequally. And I tried to figure out the same relative portion for each section.
Okay, so intelligible is bigger than visible,
Right.
and the same ratio between the two portions of the intelligible and the two portions of the visible.
Right.
Okay, all right, yeah, that looks. And then so we have these now four divisions, right?
I'm not clear on what to do.
Well, yeah, let's figure out what are the four things here? We've got these four levels, two visible ones, two intelligible ones. How does Socrates divide?
Well, those are the four affections. Right.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, so it's interesting because then at the end he comes to the four, let's start from where he begins with the line and then we come to it, because at the end he definitely lists four types of thought.
When the visible, we have images on one side and then objects, so to speak. Yeah.
Animals. Objects of man, which is something that's a product of some activity.
Right. Yeah, so he's got the reflection, there's shadows of things, and then the actual dog saw a shadow of. Right. Dennis Small, you've raised your hand. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, can you let me share screen?
Yes, let me figure that out. I'm not a Zoom aficionado.
If you make him a co-host, it's the quickest way.
There we go. You're a co. Go for it.
No, I have to
Nice
admit,
to
I
start.
didn't draw this right now. But it's something that I had done for an earlier class. The proportions are, I don't think, really the way Plato discusses them, but I tried to put together his thinking about.
Dennis, would you mind clicking the slideshow button so this is bigger and we don't have all that Microsoft stuff around it?
Yeah, hold on, give me 1 sec. Go back to that. Sorry about that. Give me a minute.
Okay, take it back. Never mind, now we lost it.
Yeah, I gave it off, that's why. Here we go. Yeah, 1 sec. Okay. There, let's try that. Is that bigger?
Yes, thank you very much.
Like I said, I did not, I confess, draw this just now as you were speaking.
I'm sure we would have believed you if you said you did.
You wouldn't have believed me, I know. It is from an earlier class that I did and so on, and I think the proportions are actually not adequately represented because to be able to fit the stuff in there, but it's an attempt to actually get at the relationships and the proportionalities between the two spheres, that of the sun and the good, which I think Plato is discussing. So if that's of some use.
Maybe he can share this. People who look at after.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Dennis, after this,
Sure.
please send me, I'll add it.
Yeah, I'll forward it to you later, Jason,
Oh, okay,
and then you can send it around.
okay.
Okay.
That's gone. So what was the, okay, so how does the intellectual side work? Yeah. What's the division Socrates makes between the intelligible people?
What I wrote down was the first section, which he didn't use the term logic, but that's what axioms, the understanding, I took it to mean logic, whereas the other section was going from assumptions up to principles, hypothesis of the higher hypothesis, that realm, ideas.
And in the first part, he included opinion, I think. Opinion versus knowable.
This is the concept he brings up sometimes, doesn't he, about having the difference between having the right opinion versus knowledge.
Right.
Sometimes it's hard to know whether you have the right opinion or the wrong opinion. Even if you have the right opinion, it's hard to know if you've got the right opinion or if you actually know something.
Right.
How about that higher level? What's the highest level of the intelligible? Socrates refers to here.
Truth,
First principle.
first principle.
What's an example of, he says, can you read you have an excerpt in mind? You can read where he says what that higher level is?
Only be seen by the mind.
Those realities which can only be seen by the mind. Or if you don't actually, if you just share your concept.
Okay, so they're not, but those things, there are like, as you assume the inquiry for this thing, there's such in the diagonal such, and not for the sake of, the sake drawn. And still, in all cases, the very things which they love and draw, which are shadows, images of themselves, in water, these things they treat, either turn as only images. They really seek to get excited for duality.
I don't think anybody can hear you on the box here.
Okay. Well, this, that, it's more like leading up to that line that there's an idea of like the likenesses are just trying to reach what the actual idea that's produced in the mind first. And so that's the concept of the first principle, that it's not, it has nothing to do with anything that's tangible or an imitation, but it's what's seen in the mind.
Drawing a circle and thinking of a circle.
Yeah.
So the lower level, somebody said was like logic, and here he's comparing it to doing geometry. You've got your assumptions, you're working it out. So in other words, you're thinking, but in terms starting from assumption. He said, I mean the assumption from which we don't proceed to a first principle, but down to a conclusion. Right. So I think, I forget who said logic, maybe Roger. Yeah, that sounds like logic, doesn't it? And then he says, and this is on, for those in the room, the right side of page 4, I regrettably took Stephanus page numbers out, so if you're watching online, I'm sorry. Can't tell you where it is. Let me read this paragraph. Socrates says, understand then that by the other section of the intelligible,
511b.
Thank you. I mean that which the reason itself lays hold of by the power of dialectics, treating its assumptions not as absolute beginnings, but literally as hypotheses, underpinnings, footings, springboards, so to speak, to enable it to rise to that which requires no assumption and is the starting point of all. And after attaining to that, again taking hold of the first dependency from it, so to proceed downward to the conclusion, making no use whatever of any object of sense, but only of pure ideas, moving on through ideas to ideas, and ending with ideas. Have we completely left the realm of science at this point, or is this just pure philosophy now? The ideas leading to ideas. Does this have any scientific bearing?
This is science. It's the activity of the human mind to self-examine and to hypothesize a more powerful understanding of the universe. That is science.
You look at the way he poses this here. It's a very active image he creates. The springboards, right? He's pointing out the hypotheses. A hypothesis is something that's underlying a foundation, literally. It's hypo underneath and thesis put there. So you've got this image of like a gymnast jumping off the springboard. Anybody think of an example of a scientific concept that's like this, that's reached by a springboard? It doesn't rely on the senses or its existence.
Speed of light.
Electricity.
Yeah. The three-phase spaces that Grotowski talked about understand the universe as a whole.
There you go. That's it. Okay.
Or
Yes.
Wasn't say the cause of gravity.
Okay, the cause of gravity, justice. So let's take the justice and then the science part. So justice is something interesting. Has anyone ever seen an unjust act?
Yes.
Yes.
Done unjust, very wrong. Okay. Has anyone ever seen somebody acting justly? Sure. Has anyone ever seen justice?
No.
Perfect justice. Has that ever been achieved yet?
There's a statue.
That's in the lower half of the device.
Isn't justice like, wearing a blindfold? Yeah.
Well,
You can't see it.
Image, isn't it? So, another one, and we're going to come to some of these in the later classes. We're going to be able to consider how does what Kepler did, is it rising to the level of what Socrates is talking about here? When Fermat says that light takes the least time, is that an idea that depends on the senses, or is that a concept that gives its own justification for existing? So, well, this is something to revisit. Keep in mind. Let me share. A couple of people in the chat have have shared images from their books here. So I'm going to share my screen, please. I'm sure people on Zoom can see this, Dave. All right, so this is cool.
Roger, could you move your head just a little bit?
It's going to be in the way of someone else.
So this is more of the end of the four affections Adrian was bringing up. The very end, he talks about four types of mentation. Yeah, so I think this will be a question for us to return to is scientific discovery. Is this on the level of dianoia? Is it noesis? Those are the Greek terms that Plato used. Here.
Why did you label the last one as imagination?
Yeah.
Why did that? This is somebody has a translation, and this is in their book. I like that. Put it back up. Yeah, sure. This is from Julian. Thank you for sharing this, Julian.
I'm trying to relate this to what we've been talking about as these four divisions. I don't.
It's not. It's not. It's sort of at the end, Socrates says, now let's take those four and apply this division in another way.
Okay. Yeah, it's the last paragraph.
Let's take a look at this one other picture here sent by another one from Julian. Share this. And I see your hand, Stephanie. Will come to you in a moment. Further meta.
Oh, okay. This makes it make a little more sense.
Excuse me.
Where'd that come from?
That was also from Julian Bruno. Thank you.
Are we gonna have access to these after?
Yeah,
Or
ask
should I
Julian
be
to
taking
send it so
picture of
we can
these?
share them.
But
This is being recorded, right?
it's being recorded, and I will. Well, they'll be. You'll be able to look at it on YouTube. You can just pause the YouTube video.
Okay, I'll go scrubbing for it, I guess.
Poor guy. I'll email them to you.
Thank you.
Okay. There's some other comments here. Jason can be reminded. Oh, Dennis Small sends the picture. Oh, that's his. In the chat, Dennis Small included his chart there. Stephanie, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Okay. This is partially what I was going to say earlier, but I think it's relevant here. Louis Pasteur started from a hypothesis that only life generates life. It was not totally unique to him, and he did empirical studies, which are quite interesting to disprove everyone who was saying that life came out of dirty rags or other things would generate itself, which he demonstrated that no one could prove that life came from non-life. But his scientific breakthrough was this development of the idea of this life that no one could see, this bacteria, which opened up an entire realm of science. I mean, anyway, so that I think, and the technology around his idea of only life generating life, whether it was pasteurizing milk or saving the vineyards of France or developing rabies vaccines and curing people. So I think that is an example of starting with a hypothesis.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Book VII of the Republic. So this next excerpt picks up right from where we left off. That was the end of Book VI. Now we're going to go into Book VII and enter Plato's Cave, which you may have heard of.
So read this in. We're going to have three groups of readers. And again, I offer if anyone online, if you'd like to read, the stock music block on, please raise your hand or say so in the chat.
I'll volunteer.
If, okay, Margaret says a volunteer here, any of the volunteers here, Nancy? Okay. So we got Margaret, Nancy, and then. Okay, that's what we'll go with. So why don't you go ahead and start here.
Next, compare our nature in respect of education and its lack to such an experience as this. Picture men dwelling in a sort of subterranean cavern with a long entrance open to the light on its entire width. Conceive them as having their legs and necks fettered from childhood, so that they remain in the same spot, able to look forward only, and prevented by the fetters from turning their heads. Picture further the light from a fire burning higher up and at a distance behind them, and between the fire and the prisoners, and above them a road along which a low wall has been built. As the exhibitors of puppet shows have partitions before the men themselves, above which they show the puppet.
That I see.
See also then men carrying past the wall implements of all kinds that rise above the wall, and human images and shapes of animals as well, wrought in stone and wood and every material. Some of these bearers presumably speaking and others silent.
Strange image you speak of, and strange prisoners.
Can I ask somebody to put this in their own? I just want to make sure everyone is following this image here. Would anyone like to restate this in their own words? The setting that Dr. Hughes is making here.
So there's a cave with a long entrance, which has got light illuminating the whole thing. And the people inside are completely fettered. They can't move their heads, they can't move anything.
They're chained.
They're chained up. So they see, so outside of the cave, there's fire. That's creating the light.
That's behind them though.
I don't
think it's in the cave. It's in the cave?
Yeah, no, they're in a cave, they're chained up, and everything is happening in the cave. And they can only look forward, and they've been chained up since they were children up till now. And behind them is a fire that is illuminating the cave. And in front of the fire, but before the people who are chained up, are people with presenting these human images and shapes, these puppets basically, that are casting shadows in front of them. So they can't actually see the things that are generating the images. They just see the shadows of these puppets. And they can only see the shadows of these puppets. And they're chained up and they can only look in front of them.
And the shadow of the fire, not the light.
Right, it's the fire. And we know fires are uneven. They flicker and so forth.
Like a movie.
So you're kind of like you're in a movie theater. You've got a projector putting something up on the screen, and that's all that you could ever see.
Isn't that for me?
The wall too, so.
Plato's movie theater.
Plato invented the movie, the cinema.
Well, actually, I do want to come back at the end of today. I was going to ask if anybody could think of ways to update this allegory for the present.
People chained up at a movie theater.
Or phone in front of their nose.
All right, Margaret, please continue.
YouTube videos.
All the fires behind them. See, okay. Like to us. 4, to begin with, tell me, do you think that these men would have seen anything of themselves or of one another except the shadows cast from the fire on the wall of the cave that fronted them?
How could they? They were compelled to hold their heads unmoved, light.
And again, would not the same be true of the objects carried past them?
Surely.
If then they were able to talk to one another, do you think that they would suppose that in naming the things that they saw, they were naming the passing objects?
Necessarily.
And if their prison had an echo from the wall opposite them, When one of the passer-by uttered a sound, do you think that they would suppose anything else than the passing shadow to be the speaker?
Why, Zeus, I do not.
Then in every way, such prisoners would deem reality to be nothing else than the shadows of the artificial objects.
Quite inevitably.
Consider then, what would be the manner of the release and healing from these bonds and this folly, if in the course of nature something of this sort should happen to them? When one was freed from his fetters and compelled to stand up and suddenly turn his head around and walk and lift up his eyes to the light, and in doing all this felt pain, and because of the dazzle and glitter of the light, was unable to discern the objects whose shadows he formerly saw, what do you suppose would be his answer if someone told him that what he had seen before was all a cheat and an illusion, but that now, being nearer to reality and turned toward more real things, he saw more truly? And if also one should point out to him each of the passing objects and constrain him by questions to say what it is, do you not think that he would be at a loss and that he would regard what he formerly saw as more real than the things now pointed out to him?
Far more real.
And if he were compelled to look at the light itself, would not that pain his eyes? And would he not turn away and flee to those things which he is able to discern and regard them as in very deed more clear and exact than the objects pointed out?
Is so.
I think we can just keep going. Let's take another set of readers. Lynn had raised her hand before. Lynn, Socrates, and anyone, Glaucon here or online?
Come on, Elliot, do a Glaucon.
Okay. Elliot is Glaucon, and Richard can be the next Glaucon. Okay, go ahead.
And if someone should drag him thence by force up the ascent, which is rough and steep, and not let him go before he had drawn him out into the light of the sun, do you not think that he would find it painful to be so hauled along and would chafe at it? And when he came out into the light, that his eyes would be filled with its beams, so that he would not be able to see even one of the things that we call real?
Why, no, not immediately.
Then there would be need of habituation, I take it, to enable him to see the things higher up. And at first, he would most easily discern the shadows, and after that, the likeness or reflections in water of men and other things, and later, the things themselves. And from these, he would go on to contemplate the appearances in the heavens and the heaven itself, more easily by night, looking at the light of the stars and the moon, than by day, the sun and the sun's light.
Of course.
And so, finally, I suppose, he would be able to look upon the sun itself and see its true nature, not by reflections in water or phantasms of it in an alien setting, but in and by itself, in its own place.
Necessarily.
And at this point, he would infer and conclude that this is it that provides the seasons and the courses of the year and presides over all things in the visible region. And is in some sort the cause of all these things that they had seen.
Obviously, that would be the first step.
Next step.
Next step.
Well then, if he recalled to mind his first habituation, his first habitation, and what passed for wisdom, and there, and his fellow bondsmen, do you not think that he would count himself happy in the change and pity them?
He would indeed.
If there had been honors and commendations among them, which they bestowed on one another, and prizes for the man who is quickest to make out the shadows as they pass, and best able to remember their customary precedents, sequences, and existences. And so, most successful in guessing at what was to come, do you think he would be very keen about such rewards, and that he would envy and emulate those who were honored by these prisoners and lauded it among them? Or would he feel with Homer and greatly prefer, while living on earth, to be serf of another, a landless man? That's a quote from, and endure rather than opine with them and live with life.
Yes, I think that he would choose to endure anything rather than such a life.
And consider this also. If such a one should go down again and take his old place, would he not get his eyes full of darkness, thus suddenly coming out of the sunlight?
He would indeed.
Now, if he should be required to contend with these perpetual prisoners in evaluating these shadows, while his vision was still dim and before his eyes were accustomed to the dark, and this time required for habituation would not be very short, would he not provoke laughter? And would it not be said of him that he had returned from his journey along with his eyes ruined, and that it was not worthwhile to attempt the ascent? And if it were possible to lay hands on and kill the man who tried to release them and lead them up, would they not kill him?
They certainly would.
This image, then, dear Glaucon, we must apply as a whole to all that has been said, likening the region revealed through sight to the habitation of the prison, and the light of the fire in it to the power of the sun. And if you assume that the ascent and the contemplation of the things above is the soul's ascension to the intelligible region, you will not miss my surmise, since that is what you desire to hear. But God knows whether it is true. But at any rate, my dream, as it appears to me, is that in the region of the known, the last thing to be seen and hardly seen is the idea of the good. And that when seen, it must needs point to us. It must needs point us to the conclusion that this is indeed the cause for all things, of all that is right and beautiful, giving birth to the visible world to life, giving birth in the visible world to light, and the author of light, and itself in the intelligible world, being the authentic source of truth and reason, and that anyone who is to act wisely in private or public must have caught sight of this.
I concur, so far as I am able.
Somebody, Julian sent in a picture. I will share that.
Oh, good. I wanted to see a picture. Where's the entrance of the cave?
Over here is where people would walk by carrying puppets and things. That's on the wall here.
Diffused sunlight.
I particularly like that reference to the remaining prisoners who would want to kill them and try to release them. Crazy. Yeah, okay.
That's why you keep people.
He's an extremist. He ruined himself.
Well, that's why at a certain point you keep people as prisoners.
Then the thing about if they had prizes for recognizing, you're at the point of that. Does anyone think of any other analogies you might throw from it?
Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, thinking of Fox, Beck. I don't. Who cares about these idle glories?
Just go and kill people. Just get your own thing. Yeah.
All right, so now the last section, we have Richard, please raise your hand again so I can read you easily as Glaucon, and we need Socrates, including if you're online and you would like to read. You're very welcome to. Richard Burton, hang on. I got it, he's Glaucon, yeah. And, oh, he was Richard. Oh. Okay, all right, no one online, I want to make it, I don't want you to feel like you're not part of this, just because you're on Zoom. Okay, so we got Art as Socrates, and then Richard as Glaucon. So, and again, you take it all starting. Come then, join me.
Be closer to her.
Oops. Yes, yeah, come then, and join me.
Come then, and join me in this further thought. And do not be surprised that those who have attained this height are not willing to occupy themselves with the affairs of men, but their souls ever feel the upward urge and the yearning for that sojourn above. For this, I take it, is likely if in this point, too, the likeness of our image holds.
Yes, it is likely.
And again, do you think that it all strange if a man returning from divine contemplations to the petty miseries of men cuts a sorry figure and appears most ridiculous, if, while still blinking through the gloom, and before he has become sufficiently accustomed to the environing darkness, he is compelled in courtrooms or elsewhere to contend about the shadows of justice or the images that cast the shadows, and to wrangle and debate about the notions of those things in the minds of those who have never seen justice itself.
It would be by no means strange.
But a sensible man would remember that there are two distinct disturbances of the eyes arising from two causes, according as the shift is from light to darkness or from darkness to light. And believing that the same thing happens to the soul too, whenever he saw a soul perturbed and unable to discern something, he would not laugh unthinkingly, but would observe whether coming from a brighter life, its vision was obscured by the unfamiliar darkness, or whether the passage from the deeper dark of ignorance into a more luminous world and the greater brightness had dazzled its vision. And so he would deem the one happy in its experience and the way of life and pity the other. And if it pleased him to laugh at it, his laughter would be less laughable than that at the expense of the soul that had come down from the light above.
That is a very fair statement.
Then, if this is true, our view of these matters must be this: that education is not in reality what some people proclaim it to be in their professions. What they aver is that they can put true knowledge into a soul that does not possess it, as if they were inserting vision into blind eyes.
They do indeed.
But our present argument indicates that the true analogy for this indwelling power in the soul and the instrument whereby each of us apprehends it is that of an eye who would not be converted to the light from the darkness except by turning the whole body. Even so, this organ of knowledge must be turned around from the world of becoming, together with the entire soul, like the scene-shifting periact in the theater, until the soul is able to endure the contemplation of essence and the brightest region of being. And this, we say, is the good, do we not?
Yes.
Of this very thing, then, there might be an art of the speediest and most effective shifting or conversion of the soul, not an art of producing vision in it, but on the assumption that it possesses vision that does not rightly direct it, and does not look where it should, an art of bringing this about.
Yes, that seems likely.
Then the other so-called virtues of the soul do seem akin to those of the body. For it is true that where they do not pre-exist, they are afterwards created by habit and practice. But the excellence of thought, it seems, is certainly of a more divine quality, a
thing that never loses its potency, but according to the direction of its conversion, becomes useful and beneficent, or again, useless and harmful. Have you never observed in those who are popularly spoken of as bad, but smart men, how keen is the vision of the little soul, how quick it is to discern the things that interest it? Proof it is not a poor vision, which it has, but one forcibly enlisted in the service of evil, so that the sharper its sight, the more mischief it accomplishes.
I certainly have.
Observe then, that this part of such a soul that had been hammered from childhood, have thus been struck free of the leaden weights, so to speak, of our birth and becoming, which attaching themselves to it by food and similar pleasures and gluttonies, turn downward the vision of the soul. If, I say, freed from these, it had suffered a conversion toward the things that are real and true, that same faculty of the same men would have been most keen in its vision of the higher things, just as it is for things toward which it is now turned.
It is likely.
Well then, is it not also likely and a necessary consequence of what has been said, that neither could men who are uneducated and inexperienced in truth ever adequately preside over a state, nor could those who had been permitted to linger on to the end in the pursuit of culture, the one because they have no single aim and purpose in life to which all their actions, public and private, must be directed, and the others because they will not voluntarily engage in action, believing that while still leaving, they have been transported to the islands of the blessed.
True.
It is the duty of us, the founders, then, to compel the best natures to attain the knowledge which we pronounce the greatest, and to win to the vision of the good, the scale that ascent, and when they have reached the heights and taken an adequate view, we must not allow what is now permitted.
What is that?
That they should linger there and refuse to go down again among those bondsmen and share their labors and honors, whether they are of less or of greater worth.
Do you mean to say that we must do them this wrong and compel them to live an inferior life when the better is in their power?
You have again forgotten, my friend, that the law is not concerned with the special happiness of any class in the state, but is trying to produce this condition in the city as a whole, harmonizing and adapting the citizens to one another by persuasion and compulsion, and requiring them to impart to one another any benefit which they are severally able to bestow upon the community, and that it itself creates such men in the state, not that it may allow each to take what course pleases him, but with a view of using them for the binding together of the commonwealth.
True, I did forget that.
That's where we're stopping. Any reflections?
It's like the Declaration of Independence at the end. I mean, it's really an initial preliminary concept of the general welfare of the common good, the benefit of the other. Beautiful.
Yeah. So at the end, in case everyone, at the end, the discussion is, well, what if once you've reached this wonderful peak of understanding, wouldn't it be wrong to make someone with this, enjoying this bliss, to go back down and be among the other people and help them? And it says, well, no, that's the common good. That's the common good. It's your the way it should be.
He talks again and again about the good, without in this section defining the good, but he talks about the idea of the good, cause of all things that is right and beautiful, the author of life. Now, I think what we find in talking to people about the 10 principles that Helga wrote, the 10th principle, where she asserts that man is good, this is the idea that received the most rejection. How can you say that? Look around. So this idea of the good is very controversial.
Yeah.
That's my experience.
I like also this image of the person, leaving the cave, going out to the light, coming back, dealing with shadows, being inept at it, looking ridiculous. He says, he gives the example of being in a courtroom, which is,
Right. Sounds familiar.
that's where Socrates is going to wind up. And he definitely does not try to defend himself the way anyone else would in the courtroom there. Okay, Joe and Samantha would like to speak. Go ahead, Joe and Samantha.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it just recalls to me when Lynn was on trial, we actually put out something called the Third Trial of Socrates. And of course, when Plato was writing this, Socrates was already dead, had been unjustly, convicted and executed. And, Mary Jane, who was intimately involved in the trials, can recall how the so-called justice system was trying to cast the darkest aspersions on everything we were doing, and even mock, like this question of the golden soul came up, and I think they tried to present it as a racist concept or something like that. So it was Lynn, descending from that higher bliss of understanding of justice into this pathetic, pitiful mockery of justice in the courtroom. So I think, given what happened to Socrates, Plato is kind of projecting backward, these two, superior and inferior sense of justice. So.
Thank you, Joe. Samantha, go ahead and unmute.
Hi, I have a question, and I apologize for my ignorance on this subject, but does Socrates have a definitive sense of or definition of good and just and right and beautiful? Because what's good and just and beautiful to one person is not necessarily good and just and beautiful to another person. So are we dealing with like a definition of good and just and beautiful, or is it kind of just an idea that's in the ether?
Fantastic question. Fantastic question. Sometimes it can be both things. Sometimes you can have a concept that is different for different people. I mean, even people who very much agree with each other. I mean, does any concept in your mind exactly cohere with the concept in another person's mind? Exactly. You might think you and your friend have a very similar idea of justice, but you might not. So even though we all have different ideas about this, there's the second question of can we come to get a better idea of what it is? So they're not mutually exclusive. So to answer your question directly, Samantha, Socrates does not give a definition of the good and the truth and the beautiful and justice. He has dialogues where that comes up a lot, but he doesn't define it. That's just not his approach. His approach is always, how can we together discuss and think together to come up with a better idea of what this thing is. So even though different people have different ideas and we'll never know it exactly, that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
Well, he says it on page 7 here. And he says, this we say is the good. It seems to, what I get at is what sort of brings things together is when the soul, goes from the darkness to the light and rises to some level of understanding. It's still not the good until I don't know the definition of this word periact, but until the soul can realize the
contemplation of this,
the entire soul, meaning humanity. Right? Until the soul is able to endure the contemplation of essence and the brightest region of being beyond the individual, but totality of humanity.
Just wanted to add that the question that was posed.
Oh, by the, can people online, can you hear everybody okay? If not, please put a message in the chat and we can move the microphone around if we need to.
I was concerned about that for the record. So I was told that everybody, I could be heard.
All right.
The microphone was muted.
I was trying to help. I was trying to help. Well, while we're setting this up here, let's hear from Jerry online.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we're going to get into it later. But one of the most revolutionary things that Lyndon LaRouche did in his life was define a standard of the good, justice, truth as relative potential population density. That the effect of good, the truth, justice can only be known on this side of the universe, as opposed to the direct knowledge after our soul ascends directly, is the increase in relative potential population density. This, when I was a young man, this was the most extraordinary idea that there was a knowable pathway to good, justice, truth, beauty.
Microphone.
And therefore, I just wanted to put that on the table. Obviously, we'll get into that later, but it was always the most stunning thing to me. That's what I want.
Is exactly what's taken up in Book I of the Republic. So I think whoever asked the question, go ahead and take a look at Book I, and they toss around some different ideas. Very interesting.
Well, yeah, the whole thing is, this is still a contemplation of what is justice. It's just a growing hypothesis. I love how he says that, it's just like a springboard or rungs on a ladder. It's hypothesizing on hypothesizing from ideas to ideas. It's just this growing whole dialogue. This is 10 books of hypothesis on what is justice, or trying to, I don't know, answering, but yeah, trying to answer that question.
It's maybe also the idea of a cone, where you go in from the bottom to the top. Your vision is wider and wider.
Okay, let's move it. There's a lot to talk about, but we haven't even started Cusa. I think this is going to be a little bit more abbreviated today than I was expecting. There's just a lot of discussion. This is the point. Oh, let me read one comment from the chat. Ms. Ruby says, justice is getting what one deserves. Mercy is not getting what one deserves. And grace is receiving something good that one does not deserve. I guess you got to ask, what does somebody deserve? You can treat a misbehaving child and give them what they deserve. Some people have a very different idea of that than others, what that kid deserves. I don't think it's necessarily clear what a person deserves. I mean, part of that is what your thought is of what a human being is. Okay, so let me pull a few things together and introduce Cusa, and can we switch to this mic for a sec? Yeah.
Maybe even the camera. Okay, great. So what we've covered here about the senses and reason and the limitations of our senses. Look, one thing to point out about the senses is that they don't even tell us about the world outside of us. Not really. Not really. When you smell something, you've got something that's interacting with your nose. So what you know about is something inside your nose. When you see something, you don't see that thing out there, not directly. You're experiencing something going on in your retina. So just to be clear, even the basic senses are not giving you direct access to reality. There's always a hypothesis involved. There's always assumptions that you're making.
Louder, please.
Thank you for bringing that up. Are we on the right mic? You can twist the dial on the little receiver mic to clockwise and it'll turn it up. Okay. If it's still too quiet, please speak up again. Now, I think I already mentioned the difference between Aristotle, who wrote essentially what are lectures, and Socrates, who has these discussions. This Republic dialogue that we're reading right here, following up on Samantha's question, the ideal Republic, they never answer that question either. A lot of these dialogues, they just don't end with an answer. They end with a way of posing questions and a way of moving forward. I do think on the good, there's a few things I'll say about it that I think are true, which is that the good means an increase in our ability to act on the world, understand it and each other, and to collaborate on that. Principles, true physical principles, improve the number of people, increase the number of people that can live on the planet, how well we can live. The truth is good. I'm gonna share. Well, the truth. So no, good question, right? Even if we don't know what the truth or good is, I still think that. Now, in terms of the two divisions of the intelligible world from Book VI, the concepts that rely on the senses and those that are that find their own justification, I just want to point out how often the senses tell us things that aren't true. Take, for example, astronomy. If you go out and watch the sun all day, and day to day to day, the sun obviously moves. It rises, it sets. It sure looks like the sun is moving. So for someone like Aristotle, who says that knowledge comes from induction, you might take a naive approach and say the sun is moving around us. So there's a different way of coming to know things based on saying why they happen. So we're next going to move beyond to another approach about why sense perception is a trap. It's not the path, not the direct path to truth, and that's through Nicolaus of Cusa. Cusa was a 15th century Catholic cardinal. He was involved in efforts for peace, for reconciliation between the branches of the churches, and he was the real founder and creator, the person responsible for the coming into being of the European Renaissance. We're going to read a portion of one of his books called On Conjectures, or On Surmises. And we'll keep in mind what we heard from Socrates about using an idea as a springboard to reach another one. Keep that in mind as we think about how Cusa says that all thought is always a surmise. It's not certain, it's a surmise. So let's go to that now. That's the next thing. We're not going to, we're never going to read all of On Conjectures. We might only read the prologue and not chapter 11. I think given the time, that's just the way it's going to go. So I would like a volunteer. This is, if you've got the Cusa book from online, we're starting on, it says page 163 at the bottom of the page.
So part one of On Surmises, On Conjectures, and I'd like someone to read that first paragraph and then a different someone to read the 3 paragraphs of the prologue. So the preface or forward, whatever that is. Any volunteer? Oh, actually, we got an online volunteer. All right, Luke, go for it.
Since a favorable moment of sorts has now presented itself, I will now disclose my conception regarding surmises. Although I know this conception to be partly unclear because of the usual shortcomings characteristic of human inventions, and because of the more particular obscurities that result from my somewhat obtuse intellect. Nevertheless, with confidence, I have expounded it for you, most excellent Father, most familiar with all literature. I have done so in order that my conception may receive the clarification that is possible by means of the almost divine light of the admirable resplendence of your most expert intellect. For I know that this new method in the investigative arts cannot perish because of its rough form, if the man who is the brightest of all will, by his refining correction, deign to make it worthy of acceptance. Therefore, by means of your very illustrious authority, furnish correction to the thoughts entering my mind with regard to this concise but very abundant way of pursuing whatsoever lofty matters.
There's the dedication.
Yeah.
Who seems to hold his Lord Julian in very high regard. Okay. And then now, Samantha, you raised your hand. Would you like to read, or did you have a comment?
I was going to volunteer to read, if that's okay.
Please, yeah, go ahead and read the prologue.
Okay. All right. Now, in my previous books of learned ignorance, you have seen more deeply and more clearly than have I myself by means of my endeavor, that precise truth is unattainable. Accordingly, it follows that every human affirmation about what is true is a surmise, for the increase in our apprehension of what is true is endless. Hence, since without the aid of any comparative relation or actual increase is directed toward this maximal, humanly unattainable knowledge, our weak apprehensions, uncertain falling short of the pure truth implies that our affirmations about the true are surmises. Therefore, the unattainable oneness of truth is known by means of a surmising otherness, and the surmising otherness is known in and through a most simple oneness of truth. Hereafter, we will come to understand this matter more clearly. Give me a second, I just got to scroll down. I'm so sorry. Okay. Created intellect of infinite actuality is present in something other than itself only in a way that is other than the way it exists in itself, so that a difference remains among all those who are making surmises. Therefore, it cannot but be most certain that the surmises of the different individuals, as regards the same inapprehensible truth, differ by degrees, and yet are disproportional to one another, so that no individual ever perfectly grasps another's meaning, although one individual comes perhaps closer to it than does another. Thus, accept as being my surmises the new thoughts which I here append, thoughts elicited by no small reflective effort, in accordance with the capability of my modest intellect. These surmises are, perhaps, far unequal to more ingenious intellectual ideas, although I fear that they will be spurned by many because of the inept way that they are now being presented. Nevertheless, I am administering them as food that is not altogether unfit for being transubstantiated into clearer intellectual expression by minds deeper than mine. For he who seeks to elicit here some spiritual nourishment by means of quite careful chewing and by frequent rumination will obtain a sustaining repast, even if at first my views seem rather to be uncooked and unpalatable because of their newness. Should I continue?
Please.
Okay. By means of a certain hand-in-hand guidance, I must lead younger individuals, all of whom lack the light of experience, to a disclosure of these concealed points, so that they may be elevated progressively to things more unknown. Hence, in clarifying more suitably the hidden intent of my surmises, I will first, by means of a certain rational progression very well known to all, fashion for my conception demonstrative examples, by means of which my line of thought can proceed to the general art of surmising. Secondly, I will set forth certain embellishing remarks, and in adding illustrative diagrams that are beneficial in regard to certain very pleasing analyses, I will solicitously endeavor to feed souls that are hungry for truth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we definitely do not have time to read chapter 11 as I had planned.
But maybe we can read the first couple of paragraphs to get a taste for it, and then have a sense of what you could continue on your own. And then I'll have some we'll have some concluding thoughts and a preview of what's coming up next week. So if anyone has any comments on what we just said, go for it, or Adrian can read.
Chapter 11.
Chapter 11.
Oh, so this is on page, if you're following along, it says 188 at the top of the page. I'm not sure what page number it is. Page 1.
Chapter 11. Participation. Since for oneness, the oneness, is for it to exist precisely and as it is, you see adequately and very clearly that oneness is identity, that is unimpartable, inexplicable, and, as it is in itself, unattainable. For just as in its own being every existent is present as it is, so in another being it is present in a manner other than as it is in itself. You will apprehend this fact readily if you pay attention. Circle, for example, insofar as it is an entity of reason, is attained with respect to its own rational being as it is. When you conceive of a figure from whose center to whose circumference all lines are equal, then by means of this rational conception, you apprehend the circle insofar as it is an entity of reason. But insofar as the circle is something perceptible and exists outside of its own rational conception, then just as it exists in something other than in the rational conception of it, so too it exists in a manner other than as it is in the conception. Therefore, the circle cannot possibly exist outside of the rational conception in the way that it exists in the rational conception. Therefore, a perceptible circle partakes, with a degree of otherness, of the oneness of the conceptual circle. Therefore, the preciseness that constitutes the conceptual circle remains unimpartable. For the conceptual circle is replicated only in otherness. For there cannot be a perceptible circle in which all the lines extending from the center to the circumference are precisely equal. Indeed, there cannot be any perceptible line that in and of itself is in every respect equal to another perceptible line. Therefore, a circle that is seen is not so precise that there could not always be one that is a more precise circle than is it. And although the circle, as it is in itself, does not impart itself otherwise than as it is, nevertheless, it can be partaken of by another only otherwise than as it is in itself. Therefore, the fact that it cannot be partaken of as it is in itself is not due to a defect on its part, but is due to the fact that it is partaken of by something other, and hence is partaken of otherwise. Pay full attention so that you may begin to understand the variety of surmises. If you admit that your intellect is something other than is the thing that is intelligible, then you will see that you cannot understand any intelligible thing as it is. For what is intelligible is understood as it is only by its own intellect, from which it has being. But by all other intellects, it is understood in a manner other than as it is. Therefore, a thing is attained as it is only in its own truth, through which it exists. Therefore, by the divine intellect alone, through which every being exists, is the truth of all things attained as it is. But by other intellects, that truth is attained variously and otherwise than as it is. Moreover, the understanding of a thing as it is unattainable by other intellect, just as a circle as it exists in this perceptible floor cannot be reproduced elsewhere except otherwise than as it is here. Therefore, inexplicable identity is unfolded variously and differently in otherness, and variety is unfolded concordantly in oneness of identity. For example, sight is partaken of differently by various acts of sight, and the variety of visible things is unfolded concordantly in the oneness of sight, just as also the diversity of the acts of sight is contained concordantly in the oneness of absolute sight. And since the divine mind is the most absolute preciseness of all things, it happens that all created minds partake of the divine mind differently and in terms of otherness of variation. However, in and of itself, the ineffable divine mind remains unable to be partaken of, since the condition of the participants causes this very result. Created minds do not receive into themselves the ray of divine light, as if by their nature they preceded their partaking of the divine light. Rather, the intellects partaking of that unimpartable, most actual light constitutes the respective quiddity of created minds. Therefore, the actuality of our intelligence consists in its partaking of the divine intellect. But since that most actual power can be received only with a variety of otherness, a variety, that is, which is received somehow concurrently with the power, it happens that the participant minds partake of the most actual intellect with a degree of otherness, that is, with that degree of actuality which, in relation to the divine intellect, is otherness or potency. Therefore, it is rather the case that our entire intelligence consists of participation in the divine actuality with a degree of potency. For in this way, the ability actually to understand truth as it is befits created minds, even as it is proper to our God that the divine actuality be partaken of with various degrees of potency by created minds. Therefore, the more godlike an intelligence is, the nearer its potency is to actuality as it is. But the more obscure an intelligence is, the more distant it is from actuality. Therefore, actuality is partaken of differently and variously by near, by remote, and by very remote potency. Moreover, that inaccessible loftiness is not to be approached as if there could be no access at all to it, nor, having been approached, is that loftiness to be supposed actually to have been perfectly apprehended. Rather, we are to believe that it can always be approached more closely while it remains ever unattainable as it is in itself. By way of comparison, time advances toward everlastingness, with which it can never attain equality, even though it approaches continually. You now see that the positive assertions of the wise are surmises. For example, when with your very clear eyesight you, O Father, see before you the face of the Supreme Pontiff, our most holy Lord, Pope Eugene IV, you form of it a positive assertion, which, in conformity with your sight, you maintain to be precise. But when you turn toward the root from whence the senses' discrimination flows, when you turn toward reason, you understand that the sense of sight partakes of reason's discriminating power with a degree of otherness that is contracted to the sense organ. Consequently, you see the defect that characterizes the falling away from preciseness. For you contemplate the face not as it is in itself, but in its otherness, according to your eye's angle, which differs from that of all the eyes of other living beings. Therefore, a surmise is a positive assertion that partakes, with a degree of otherness, of truth as it is in itself. However, just as by means of the oneness of reason, the senses experience their own otherness and make surmises by freeing from precise oneness assertions about perceptible objects, so reason, by means of its root oneness, that is, by means of the light of intelligence, discovers its own otherness and its falling away from preciseness into surmise. Similarly, intelligence, insofar as it is a power near to God, rejoices that by the aid of divine oneness, it makes surmises in its own very clear way.
Any reflections?
Yeah. His approach is very much, his approach is very much like that of Plato. That is, he has a reasoning approach, which even the language is somewhat similar to Plato's.
How so? Say more. How is it similar to Plato, do you see?
He's reasoning out the idea. It's the way that his method, the way that he develops the idea is a rational approach.
Yeah, this seems to be responding to an earlier question about the differences in ideas and differences in how people conceive of certain ideas. If he's talking about, that there will always be a difference in how one person will conceive of an idea versus how you conceive of it, that there's never going to be a complete perfection and unity among everybody that has the same idea. But he also, what he lays out is a method of discovering something that approaches a better conception of an idea. And what I think he's talking about is in this later half is identifying this otherness within of an idea that you see with either somebody else or from your own observation. So there's a contradiction that happens, and from that contradiction, you're able to discover something more truthful when you try to unify your idea to the observation or a different conception of the idea. And so what Plato was talking about in the Republic, this dialectic approach or dialectical method of intelligence that is a continuous process of trying to find a difference in your idea with somebody else, and then thinking it through together. That's what you were talking about with this dialogue, is that even we didn't read the first book in the Republic, but that's really what the first book is about, is that there's different people that have different conceptions of justice, like Glaucon, there's Symmachus, there's one other guy. But they're having this conversation about, well, I think justice is this, I think justice is this, and then Socrates is kind of going through, well, if that's the case, then would this mean that this would be included in your definition of justice? And then there's this conversation about it that ultimately continues to develop through the entire book of the Republic, because you see the idea of justice continually be built upon through different
metaphors, different allegories, like what we read with the metaphor of the good being compared to the sun reflecting light upon objects, and seeing that as the same thing as when the soul encounters truth, and you're able to have a more clear vision of the good, and then also the allegory of the cave. So yeah, I just thought this was, yeah, he's very precise in how he lays out this method. Just in these couple of pages, so I thought it was really good.
And this is something we'll be able to take up more on Wednesday. So let me, what I'm going to do now is I want to draw the YouTube stream to a close. I'm just going to say a few concluding things and lead until next week. We can keep talking, but I want to do that I don't want the YouTube video to be more than 2 hours long. So great, thanks. So
one of the things that that Cusa had discussed earlier in that paper was that he makes a similar fourfold division, like what Socrates had done in Book VI of the Republic. And maybe on Wednesday we can read those other portions of this Cusa work. He says that the ultimate oneness is God. And then when you add some otherness to that, or the next level down is intelligible. And that's almost like a line. He likens it to the number 10. And then with 100, you've got rationality. And then below that, 3 dimensions is the perceptual world. And he says, well, we should stop there because that is the world, it's 3-dimensional. So when he was saying this thing here about the circle, the rational circle having every point the same distance from its center, that's true, but no perceptual circle will ever be able to do that. To the extent it is participating in that rational concept, it's close to it, and it could be closer or further, but it is not it exactly. So as Dennis Speed had pointed out in the chat, this thing about there being no perceptual circle where everything is the same distance from the center means if you apply that to perceptual things like planets, planets can't move in circles. So let me read a couple of lines from Cusa's De Docta Ignorantia, Book 2, Chapter 11, as a segue for next week. In this work, Cusa says, it is not the case that in any genus, even the genus of motion, we come to an unqualifiedly maximum and minimum. Hence, if we consider the various movements of the spheres, we will see that it is not possible for the world machine to have as a fixed and immovable center either our perceptible earth, or air, or fire, or any other thing. For with regard to motion, we do not come to an unqualifiedly minimum, that is, to a fixed center. Interesting. Therefore, the earth, which cannot be the center, cannot be devoid of all motion. Indeed, it is necessary that the earth be moved in such a way that it could be moved infinitely less. Therefore, just as the earth is not the center of the world, so the sphere of the fixed stars is not its circumference. He goes on, nor does the earth or any other sphere even have a center. For since the center is a point equidistant from the circumference, and since there cannot exist a sphere or circle so completely true that a truer one could not be posited, it is obvious that there cannot be posited a center which is so true and precise that a still truer and more precise center could not be posited. Precise equidistance to different things cannot be found except in the case of God, because in God alone is infinite equality. Last quote. Neither the sun, nor the moon, nor the earth, nor any sphere can, by its motion, describe a true circle, since none of these are moved around a fixed point. Moreover, it is not the case that there can be posited a circle so true that a still truer one could not be posited. So this is from his Deducta Ignorantia, on learned ignorance, which really sets the stage for modern science. And next week, we're going to look at the first modern scientist to take that approach, namely Johannes Kepler, who took an approach of astronomy that was not based on the senses. It was not based on curve fitting. It wasn't based on optimizing a model like in machine learning today. Kepler said, no. What I don't want to do is have an understanding that exists in the world of the perceptual. I don't want to have an understanding that is about shapes and so forth. I want to have an understanding that's about the cause of motion. And so Kepler developed the theory of gravitation. He had a physical hypothesis for why the planets moved around the sun the way that they do. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at next week, or maybe on the Wednesday after, is Kepler talking through how hard it would be for a planet to move in a circle. He says, since there's nothing at the center of a planetary orbit, no planet goes right around the sun, nor could it, as Cusa points out. Every planet is off, it's also an ellipse, but even if it were a circle off center, if it can't look at the center, how does it keep an eye on the sun and adjust its distance from the sun just right as it goes all the way around it to result in a circle? And that would actually be really hard, even though it seems like a simple shape, but dynamically to make it would be difficult. So let me wind this up here. I do want to ask a couple of questions to pose, and feel free to answer these by responding to the emails about the classes, by leaving comments in YouTube. We'll cover some of these next week and review some of the comments that came in. So if you would like to write in your own words, how do you consider the senses to be a springboard to truth? How does that work? And how do our thoughts differ from what our senses give us? What's the difference? How are our senses a springboard to the truth? How are our thoughts? What kind of concepts can you have that are not like sensual concepts? And then we also already had a couple examples of this, but think about a modern parable, allegory of the cave. How might you set this concept from Plato maybe in a different context? And we already had a couple of them here, but think about it and write that out. And so if you'd like to send in your conclusions or your conjectures, your surmises, please do. We'll be able to discuss that. And then the last thing is on Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern time in the US, we are going to be having a discussion session where we're going to be able to read more of this Cusa, perhaps some more Plato. If you've got requests or thoughts about what you would like to discuss there, again, send an email, leave a comment on this YouTube video, and we're going to keep talking about that here on the Zoom call a bit. But for those watching on YouTube, thanks for joining, and see you next week.